Hey guys, welcome to Fabrication 101. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of distortion and how to keep your project square while welding it out. So the most important part to keeping distortion to a minimal is your fit up. You want your fit up to be on point. You want it, if you're doing 90s, you want everything on there to be 90. You don't want to be able to see any light anywhere. If you take that extra 5 minutes to get that exactly right, then when you weld it out and you're all done, you don't have to sit there and hit it with the hammer and bend it back into square. Also, an important part is the material type. If you're welding, say, aluminum extrusion, it's not going to work that much. It doesn't tend to pull very hard. But if you're welding aluminum plate, it pulls pretty good, so you're going to want to put a spacer up underneath and clamp it down to preload it, depending on where you're going to be welding it. Mild steel, it pulls pretty good, so you know, same sort of deal. Either pre-bend it out a little, or little things like that. You can actually, it's going to pull no matter what, so what you can do is you can actually sand it. Say if you're doing a 45, you can sand it to where it's, well, you'd want to go opposite. So say it's opened up to about 92 degrees, so that when you weld it, it's going to shrink and pull in, it'll be at 90. Little things like that, and you got to work on it and figure it out. Stainless works more than anything I've ever welded. So know your material type, get a good fit up, and also your joint configuration. If you're welding fillets all the way around, then it's kind of going to equalize, and you can get away with a lot more, you'll see in the video. But if you're welding, say, two pieces together like this, and you have an angle in it, then you've got three joints. You've got two butt welds, a fillet weld, and an outside corner. And fillets pull more than anything else, so you kind of want to save that for last. So that way it's all locked in nice and tight, and it'll still pull no matter what on those fillets. So just something to consider before you start welding them out. So these are the two pieces that I have cut. This one was just straight off the chop saw. I'm going to weld it as it is. See, it's a little off because most chop saws don't cut square, so it's going to have a slight gap down there. And this one I did I sanded it nice and good so there's no gaps all the way around. There shouldn't be, just barely. And I'll show you that fit up is key to keeping it square. So this one I'll do, normally, and this one gonna have to fight it a little, cock it up to get it to where when you weld it, it pulls it into square. And a little tip for sanding these square: you need a sander, or that's what I like. It's really hard if you don't have one. But so you find the tall edge, which would be this edge right here, and you take that, the tall edge, put it up top. And when you run it into the sander, that's the side that's going to take the most metal off, is the top. So if you're tacking an uneven part, you want to tack the side that's got the tallest edge. So come here. Alright, so this side is the tall side, and then find out which side is the other tall side. So this side right here. So this is the first side I'm going to tack. Is this one right here, because it's the tallest out of all four. So get it lined up wherever you're wanting it, Hold it down so it's nice and tight. Get nice and 45'd in there, and then you just rock when you tack. That's all you need. Clip your wire. Always clip your wire. Mostly I do it because it saves your tack, because the next one will want to jump, and sometimes you're really delicately have it held on there. So then what I do is I come, and you can use a square or whatever. I just have these around, so I like to use them. Simple. And you just pull it up. And since you tack the tallest side, all you're doing is pivoting everything up. If you tack this side first, there's real no way to get this side square. So I'll pivot it up, and I'm going to push it just past square. So it looks like I need a little hammer. Where is my hammer? Alright. I like to use a dead blow so it doesn't mark anything up, but I can't find it. So I'm just going to tap it up. Check it. That's square right there, but I want to push it past, because whenever you have a gap, it's going to suck in. So you got to push it past square, especially on something like this. And when you're welding square stuff that's nice and wide like this, it's not going to pull as much as, say, like a 1-inch square piece. Alright, just past there. And then we're going to check square this way. And it's also going to, see, I like to tack tallest side right here and then go to the opposite side, which is going to be your lowest complete side. And so it's all going to suck and pull that way and this way when you tack it. So square it up this way, or past square this way also. You're trying not to break your tack, because it happens a lot. And it's important to, even if you think it's good enough, just keep going with it, because it's a lot harder to square things up after they're welded. Stayed. Yep. Yep. Alright. Now you're going to tack with that gap, so you don't want to push down on it. I actually push down on the opposite side there. And push down with the gun on the part so it'll pull that gap out. There you go. You can check square. See if it stayed. Yep. Yeah. And then normally what I do is I sequence my tacks like this. Tallest side, opposite side, and then I'll run one right here too, because it's harder for it to pull from here to here versus like this tack. So if you did this tallest tack and then went over here and tack, it'd be extremely hard for this to pull itself down into place. So here, 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 and then last one next to your first tack. Alright. Now this is the one that's nice and square, so I really don't have to do any squaring up. I'll show you what I do when I have them nice like this, nice and trued up. So I'll just tack one side. Spin it opposite corner. Right here. And back by the first side. And usually, as long as you're nice and straight and there's no gaps, that should come out nice and square. Square and square. Alright. That's why it's real nice to have tight gaps. It makes it so much easier if you spend that extra 5 minutes getting it all sanded and dialed in. it saves you a lot of time on the welding. So when you weld on thinner stuff, basically all metal shrinks, so it's going to pull and curve its way up on all the sides. And if you have a longer piece, it's easier to deal with, but since this is short, it's gonna be pretty noticeable. So this is some 045, I believe, just some stainless, and I like to clip it about the width of that part. You can see that. Then I'm gonna lay it down right under where this piece is going to go. Then I'm going to clamp it down in all four corners. Alright, so I got this one all clamped down. So what I like to do on pieces like this, any side that you weld in say this direction, if you start back here and weld up to here, this whole part's going to pull this way. If you weld here to here, this whole part's going to pull that way, you know. So you got to think about those, and it's also going to pull towards it, but it mostly is going to pull in the direction that you welded, because it's slowly closing up the gap, as you weld, and you can really see it on thinner metals. So anyways, I like to lock it in place by these two here. So I'll weld this one in this direction, this one in this direction, and let's see, so that's going to pull it that way, and then this one's going to pull it back, but it's never going to pull it back as close to as it was. So then I'll weld this back seam right here, so it'll pull it this way more, and hopefully true it up just like we did when we tacked. And so hopefully that'll bring it back to nice and square, and then your last one's going to be here, and your last one's never going to pull as much. Each one pulls less and less as you go. So first one's going to pull the most, so we counteract that by welding this one, then this one. And since you've got these two welded, this one isn't going to be able to pull this way very much, if any at all. And then you weld that one. And since this is the wider side, it can't pull as much this way as, say, this one can pull this way. So the less surface area, the more it can pull one way. If this was longer, it wouldn't pull hardly at all. Alright, my volts are 18.1, and my inches per minute is 204 inches. I leave my inducted set to 4.5, which I don't even know what that is on this machine or what it means. So I just leave it. It doesn't make that much of a difference until you're doing long arcs on it. Alright, here we go. I'm just going to do little circles, it's a technique I like to do, and a slight push angle. Clip your wire, opposite side, see it pulled that way. Now I'm gonna, actually, it's gonna not show you the correct thing until it's all the way cooled off. That's when it pulls the most, but it's slightly at a square that way. And when I start, I back into my last ripple, just to make a nice little tie-in. Clip your wire, then it'll hit the front one. to let it sit and cool down before you unclamp it. Otherwise it's going to spring back more. So it's always going to change from part to part depending on how it's cut. But on this uneven one, I like to cut or to weld on the tightest gaps first, but I still like to do what I did on the other piece, which is keep this locked in. So I'll weld the closest gap going this way from the loosest side to the tightest side, because it's not going to pull as much as it could if I welded from here to there, because the gap's open on this side, and so it has a place for that part to fall into. If you weld from this side to that side, it doesn't have as much room to pull, if that makes sense to you. So I'm going to go that to that, and then I'll come around and do the opposite way. And depending on what your gap is, if it was the other way and you checked it and it was still pulled this way too much, then you could weld this way to that way to help bring it back that way. And then I'll probably hit this one that way, and then that one that way. And I'm just going to leave it like this, and hopefully be able to show you the curve that's going to happen on that. And the more heat you put into it, the more it's going to pull. So if you stay nice and consistent the whole time, then it'll be easier to figure that out. Alright, so pulled that way, yep. And everyone's technique for keeping things square is going to be slightly different, because how fast you weld, what you weld with, all that. Alright, so it's nice and square. Let's see. This way. And the longer you let it cool off and all that will have an effect on how it turns out also. Last but not least, alright, we've let this guy cool off, so now we can undo him, see how he springs, if he springs, and we'll check the levelness on the back and how square the part stayed. Alright, let's check it. Alright. Nice and flat. Nice and flat. Check this. You kind of either need to cut a piece right here, or you can do something like that. My regular square, carpenter square with that too. This isn't that square, but it's pretty dang close. So you can see it stayed nice and true. This side's going to be hard. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll keep it on a nice square surface with what it's riding against, and just use it perspectively. Alright, so here's the other one that we didn't clamp down. And it looks like it stayed nice and pretty dang flat. So, yep, nice and flat. And pretty dang flat. It looks like it has some suck in right here where it dipped in or pulled up towards the weld. But not much at all. Like this, that's just fine as it is for most things. Now let's check squareness. Looks like it's pulled this way. And that way it's pretty dang square. So, what we could have done is welded this one first. Instead of this one. I checked it and it did look like it was pulled that way just slightly. Or, yeah, pulled that way just slightly. But welding this pulled it so much more than I originally expected. So you can tuck that away for your memory, weld one of these and see that. And if not, the only other way is to try and tap it with a hammer. And if it doesn't line up nice, then you're going to have to, if it has to be perfect, then you can cut this seam out right here with the cutoff wheel and maybe slightly into these and re-weld right there to help pull it back. You don't have to cut the whole thing off usually. You can just cut right in there and it'll pull to close in that gap.